Oranguru was obviously made for doubles. I have spent a considerable amount of time thinking about a good single set for him, and it's actually really difficult. You can tell from both his unique move and 2 out of 3 of his abilities that are only viable in doubles that he is meant to be played in the VGC or any kind of doubles or even triples format. So we'll go ahead and jump into his stats. He has decent bulk with 90, 80, 110, so he takes a lot of hits, especially on the special side. It should be very easy for him to take hits, and very rarely should he get one shot. His attack and speed are both at base 60, which is below average. His attack is not very good, but he really doesn't need to be using it anyway. His speed at base 60 is actually a crowded tier when you're not counting Pokebank, because he shares this base speed with Incineroar, Primarina, Toucannon, and other Pokemon. So really running a little extra speed might help you a lot in the long run. That way you can still outspeed those Pokemon that may not be running investment of their own. So his topping is really not bad, because each type complements each other by stopping one weakness that the type itself would have. So what I mean by that is a normal type is usually weak to fighting, but because it's half psychic as well, the fighting type is only neutral against him. And the psychic type is normally weak to ghost, but normal is immune, which means that it cancels out that weakness as well. In the end, this means he only has 2 weaknesses and 2 resistances, so he's taking neutral damage from every other type, which is not really good or bad. It's just okay. It's better to have more resistances, but if you trade that off for more weaknesses, it's really hard to tell what's better. So, for his abilities, as far as singles go, you should always run Inner Focus. Even though Inner Focus is not the best ability on its own, all it does is prevent flinching. It's useful in very rare situations, but as far as singles goes, it's more useful than the other 2. Now, his other 2 abilities are very strange. Telepathy is fairly common, but Symbiosis was previously only seen on one other Pokemon. So telepathy means you can't take damage from your opponent's attacks. So say you're on a doubles field beside a non-Alolan Marowak. It goes for Earthquake, you don't take damage. So that can be handy, especially if you use a lot of area moves in doubles. Symbiosis means that if your opponent loses an item, your Pokemon will immediately give your item, or its item, to its partner. And I actually have a very interesting set that a couple of friends of mine told me about, and I will be more than glad to share that with you all, because I think it's so interesting, and if it were to work, it's just it's very wild and very unique, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the first set, and the only single set that I would think would really be useful on this Pokemon, is a sweeper. Either a slow, bulky sweeper, or a Trick Room sweeper. So Leftovers or Life Orb is the best items for it, in my opinion. Leftovers to help you live a little longer if you were to run Calm Mind, and Life Orb to do more damage, which would be more likely on the Nasty Plot set. You would want to run a Modest or Quiet Nature. Now, if you were not running Trick Room, I would say run Modest and put the extra EVs into Speed, so that you might be able to just edge out those other 60 speed tier Mons if they're not invested. Otherwise, if you run Trick Room, obviously you want to run Quiet, and you want to run as little speed as possible. Sadly, even though Oranguru is fairly slow, and running a minimum speed nature makes him even slower, he's still not slower than Pokemon such as Wishiwashi that run neutral speed natures. So he's not the most effective Trick Room Pokemon, sadly enough. Now, for moves, Nasty Plot or Calm Mind are going to be your setup move of choice. It really depends on if you want more bulk or if you want all the power you can get. As far as coverage, Psychic or Psyshock, depending on whether your team needs more physical or special offensive presence. Shadow Ball or Focus Blast is good because they offer coverage against a lot of types that might resist Psychic type otherwise. And then Trick Room, if you're deciding to run a Trick Room sweeper, which I would recommend, especially if the meta turns out to be a lot faster and a lot of the slower mons don't see a lot of use, Otherwise, you'll want to run some kind of coverage in either Energy Ball, you can run Thunderbolt, or you can even run Foul Play to help cover those opponents that might wall you otherwise. So those are the main moves that I see him using, but he also gets things like he gets both Rain Dance and Thunder, which is a decent combo on its own. And if you're running a Rain team, he could help it out because your opponent may not expect you to carry Rain Dance, and if they were to knock out, say, your Politoed or your Pelipper, they may think you have no other way to get Rain up. And then you switch in your Oranguru, set up the Rain Dance, and suddenly they get swept by your Swift Swim Mega Swampert, for example. He also gets Screens, which many Pokemon in this meta do, and I'm just not sure how common they'll be because in the past they're run occasionally, but you really don't see them in every match, but that may change. And he also gets a lot of doubles moves such as After You and Quash, as well as Instruct, which is his unique move. And Instruct is a very hard move to understand, in my opinion, because the ability can change depending on your speed compared to your teammates. So I have a little bit of an example here, and I thought it would be better to kind of help visualize it by looking at the Pokemon that may be on the field. So say that you're running a team with a normal Slowbro and a Oranguru on a doubles team. The first turn, let's say you protect with a Oranguru and you Calm Mind with your Slowbro. Now, if you were to use Instruct on it the next turn and you outspeed it, it will use Calm Mind as soon as you use Instruct. But when its turn rolls around, it'll still be able to use whatever move you selected. So say you went for a Scald, suddenly that Scald is at +2 instead of +1.5. Now on the flip side of that, for Pokemon that outspeed Oranguru, such as Crobat, let's say you Brave Bird one of your opponent's Pokemon. Then you use Instruct on the Crobat, it will instantly Brave Bird again and hit your opponent hard twice. Now, this is also very useful if you were to have something like a Sylveon on your team. You could get it to Hyper Voice twice in a turn, which is very hard to deal with for a lot of teams because a Pixelate Hyper Voice is so strong. So, really, it's Oranguru giving up his turn in order to give the other Pokemon another move. And this has a lot of different uses. I could see some crazy things happening with this. But the set I mentioned earlier was to run the ability Symbiosis on your Oranguru and run it alongside Alolan Marowak. So let's say you go for a Flame Charge with your Alolan Marowak to build its speed. Then you'll run a minimum attack, such as, let's say, Modest Oranguru. And you'll use Brutal Swing on the Marowak. Now this is very strange. Why would you attack your partner? Well, if you run minimum attack Brutal Swing on a Ghost Fire type Marowak, you will activate its weakness policy if you decide to carry it. Then your Oranguru's ability activates Symbiosis, giving your opponent your item, and you give them a thick club that you were carrying on your Oranguru right before this happened. Suddenly, you have a +2 attack, +1 speed, thick club carrying Marowak, and that is just so insane to even think about how strong that would be. Apart from that, you could run Instruct, and you could cause the Marowak to Flame Charge twice in a turn, and double its speed even further. And there are just so many crazy sets. So if you can think of anything else that you could do with Instruct to absolutely break the VGC meta, please let me know down below.